My experience happened in the summer of 1994. I was 41 years old at the time and living in Northeast Portland, Oregon. My son was 14 and he had two best friends in the neighborhood, one that lived right next door and the other about a half a block away. They had all been begging me to do some kind of summer camping trip, so I decided to take them out to Pacific City for the weekend on the Oregon coast for a boys' trip. Pacific City today is a totally different place than it was back then. It has completely blown up with tourists and big houses and expensive hotels, but when we were there, it was quiet and barely on the map unless you were a local. It's quite a ways off the main highway that runs down the coast, so there were never any crowds and it was just a sleepy little beach town. To give you an idea of where we were camping, there is a giant 250-foot sand dune right on the main beach in Pacific City, and the whole area is called Cape Kiwanda. Most people stay on the south side of the sand dune where the town is, and on that side you can drive and play on the beach and hike up to the top of the dune, which is actually a blast to do because you can run back down it at full speed. Where we were was on the north side of the dune and way up on a separate sandy cliff that's surrounded by trees. The camp spot itself was right on the edge and had one of the most incredible views of the ocean that you can get. I don't know if you can even get there anymore, but for any Oregonians that might want to know the exact location, it's just north of town on McPhillips Drive. Then you can take a left on a dirt road called Ridge Road, and then follow that until it dead ends and you're there. There were never any signs or markers. We would just park at the dead end, then walk through the trees and out to the edge where there was a sandy patch. I would also be curious if anyone else has ever seen anything out there. When we got there, the boys spent the entire first day down on the beach, running up and down the dune, and walking back down the road into town to get candy and drinks from the one small convenience store. That night, they all crashed in their tent around 11 o'clock while I stayed up. Before going to bed, I made myself a vodka drink and sat in a folding chair listening to the ocean and watching the night sky. Around 11:30 though, I started noticing very small flashes behind me. They were just little flickers of light through the trees that weren't very bright, but they were enough to get my attention and make me turn around a few times. I remember hoping it wasn't someone else up there trying to find our secret campsite. Eventually I got up to check it out, and I needed to go to the bathroom before bed anyway, so I walked back into the trees a few feet and stood there waiting to see it again. While I was standing there and literally in the middle of going to the bathroom, I saw something I truly cannot explain. There was a small swarm of tiny green lights rising up from the forest floor. It looked like there were maybe 20 or 30 of them in total, and they were all hovering and floating around inside the trees without making a single sound. Some of them were closer to me, which had to be only about 20 feet away, and then some were farther in and deeper into the trees. The only thing I could compare it to was lightning bugs, like I remembered from when I grew up in Ohio, but these didn't blink. They were solid, steady lights, and every one of them was a stunning emerald green color. I had never heard of lightning bugs in Oregon, especially not on the coast, but in the moment that's all I could come up with. After watching them float around for just a few seconds, the whole cluster of them rose up together and disappeared into the upper canopy of the trees, and I could see that some of them were even taking off into the air above. I just stood there completely dumbfounded and had no frame of reference for what I had just seen. I probably stood in the trees for another 10 minutes staring and hoping they would come back, but when they didn't, I finally went back to my chair, finished my drink, and tried to come up with a logical explanation. I came to the conclusion that it had to be some kind of coastal insect or firefly phenomenon, like a bioluminescent bug that I didn't know about. It didn't make total sense to me, but I didn't wake up the boys or make a big deal out of it. I just went to bed. The next day was totally normal, but I did tell my son and his friends what I had seen, which barely got a reaction. They took off to do their thing again, and I pulled out an old hang glider that I had strapped to the top of the car. I wasn't going to actually launch off of anything. I just thought it would be fun to put together and let the boys run down the smaller dunes with it to catch a few feet of air. That night was almost a carbon copy of the first one. The boys were exhausted and in their tent by 11, and I stayed up again with another drink and in the same chair. This time I was actually hoping to see the lights again. After turning around to look in the trees every couple of minutes for a solid hour, I did finally see them again, but this time they were floating over the beach about 100 feet below us. From where we were on the ridge, I could perfectly see that it was the exact same emerald green lights in a swarm and floating just above the sand. I can't quite explain how excited I was to see this for the second time. Without even thinking, I grabbed a flashlight and started walking down the steep hill toward them. I didn't take my eyes off them the whole time, and they were just staying there in a loose cluster right on the beach. When I was about 3/4 of the way down the hill and only about 50 feet from them, I watched the entire swarm quickly move away from me and go out over the water. They got to one spot over the waves, then dropped straight down into the water. Pacific City has an extremely gradual beach, so this wasn't deep water. You can walk pretty far out and still only be in up to your knees. I ran to the bottom of the hill and toward the water, and I could still see them moving under the surface. I could easily see they were all still together and active. Then as I got closer to the water, they did go out where it gets deeper and dove down until I lost sight of them. I really want to emphasize how incredible this was. Whatever I had seen hit me on an emotional level, and I remember standing on the beach alone, literally on the verge of tears when I watched them disappear in the water. I stood out there scanning the beach and the water, talking to myself out loud and hoping I would see something, anything, but that was it. I have no idea how long I stayed down there, but eventually I walked back up the hill to camp, immediately woke up my son and his friends, and told them what had just happened. They were a little more interested this time, but also too tired to care much, though they did say it sounded cool. I don't think they fully grasped how weird and impossible it actually was. I stayed up in my chair for several more hours and barely got any sleep that night. The next morning, we had to pack up early and get back to Portland. I had to work the next day, so unfortunately I had no choice but to leave. If I had had a choice, I would have stayed another week just for the chance to see them even one more time. Back at home and during the following week, I told my wife, my coworkers, my friends, and really anyone else who would listen. I'm perfectly fine saying I wouldn't shut up about it for a few weeks. Everyone I knew had spent time on the coast, and not one person I talked to had ever heard of lightning bugs or anything like it on the coast or anywhere else in Oregon. If they were insects, they didn't behave like any I've ever seen, and I've never even heard of an insect that not only lights up, but can swarm in the trees one night, then go completely underwater in the ocean the next. I literally saw them glowing under the water, at night, and in the freezing cold ocean. I don't know how that's even possible. I am now 72 years old and still living in Portland. I've been out to the coast 100 times since it happened, and I've still never seen anything like it. It was just a once-in-a-lifetime thing that I was lucky enough to see. Everyone who knows me knows the story, but I'd sure love to meet someone else who has seen it too. My name is Kate. I'm 28 and I've been traveling the western US in a camper van with my dog Birch since February of 2024. Call it a quarter-life crisis, but I left a really good job to figure things out and get a break from real life. I found a guy named Bob on YouTube who runs a channel called Cheap RV Living, and his videos changed me and made me realize I wasn't living the life I wanted to be living. I pulled out a large chunk of my savings and bought a 2019 Transit camper van that was set up for full-time, off-grid living. I know that all sounds cliche and overdone since so many people are doing it, but it really was one of the best decisions I've ever made. My story has a few parts to it, so I'll do my best to tell them because I believe they're connected. In May of last year, I was traveling through southeastern Arizona, and I had been at a camping area called Indian Bread Rocks near Bowie. On the day we got there, and after getting the van set up, Birch and I took a walk through the boulders behind our site to check everything out. So you can get an idea of where we were, there are incredible rock formations everywhere, along with huge balancing rocks, and it's all surrounded by desert ridges and buttes. It's really a beautiful area and feels totally remote and quiet. After dinner that night, Birch and I watched a movie on my iPad. Then at around 10:30, I went outside to bring my folding camp chair in and let Birch out before bed. Right when I stepped out of the van, I saw 3 lights directly above the ridge behind my site. They weren't high up like where a plane would fly. They were only a few hundred feet off the top of the ridge. All 3 of them were moving in slow looping patterns around each other, almost like they were dancing, and every 30 seconds or so, they would make a perfect triangle shape, then break apart and dance around more. I really didn't know how to feel about what I was seeing because it was just weird and mesmerizing. I only watched it for a few minutes, then all 3 of the lights dropped behind the other side of the ridge and I couldn't see them anymore. Right away, I figured someone was out there flying drones. I will say though, I never did hear any sounds, but that could have been because they were too far away from me. I thought it was a cool thing to see, but that was about it. I got back in the van, locked up, and went to bed. That same night, just before 1 a.m., I woke up to loud noises and flashing lights outside the van. The noises are super hard to describe, but think of really quick and loud whale sounds like you'd hear underwater in the ocean. They were similar to that. And every time I'd hear one, I would see several fast pulses of blue light through the cracks in my window covers. At this point, I was thoroughly freaking out, and Birch was barking loud. Thank God he's a bigger dog with a bark that sounds way more menacing than it is, because I felt like it would scare most people away if they heard it. I did have a can of bear spray ready, and I was convinced some psycho was going to start yanking on one of the doors, but it only lasted a few minutes. After it stopped, I wanted to look outside so badly to see what was going on, but I couldn't bring myself to pull the window cover off. It took me a full 15 minutes of dead silence, then I finally took the window cover off the sliding door and didn't see a thing outside except dark desert. The only idea I could come up with was that there might have been people out there riding electric motorcycles or bikes at night, and I was hearing their electric motors and seeing the headlights flashing. That's a pretty weak explanation though. Fully awake at that point, I double-checked my locks and tried to sleep. It took a while, but I know I fell asleep because I had the single weirdest dream I've ever had. In this dream, I actually woke up to someone knocking on the side door of the van. It seems weird to say that I woke up in a dream, but that's what happened. When I opened the slider, my mom was standing there. She lives in East Texas, so that would make no sense, but in the dream it felt totally normal. She was her usual happy self and asked if I wanted to come out by the fire and talk, so of course I did. We sat right outside the van and talked around the fire pit for what felt like a long time. She was asking me how my trip was going and if Birch was having a good time, but then went into questions that weren't like her, like why I chose to leave my job and why people in general feel that they need to get away from other people and responsibilities. Those aren't questions she would ask me because she already knew why I left and why I'm attracted to more of a nomad lifestyle. She has a hippie side to her too and has always been supportive of my lifestyle. It just felt off and not like her, and to be totally honest, I felt like I was being interrogated in a way. At the end of the dream, she gave me a big hug that felt very real and loving. Then she said goodnight and walked away. Literally down the road and out into the desert at night. That's how the dream ended, and because it was a dream, I guess I didn't see any problem with that. This is the part that in my mind connects everything and deeply freaks me out. When I woke up, it was early morning and I felt completely drained, physically and mentally. I remember making an extra strong coffee, and then when I opened the door to let Birch out, the very first thing I noticed was that the fire pit at my campsite had fresh ashes and a few partially burned logs in it. I physically had to take a step back because it looked like someone had been there while I was sleeping. I did not have a fire at any time while I was there. I saw the pit when I got there, and it had nothing in it but dirt from whoever had been there before me. Seeing the fresh fire like that gave me a sinking feeling in my stomach, along with a full reality check that I was a woman camping alone in the middle of nowhere. I realized it came down to 2 possibilities. Either someone came into my campsite in the middle of the night and made a fire, which was highly unlikely because Birch would have noticed and freaked out, or something else happened that I can't explain. Either way, I didn't feel safe out there, so I packed up and drove into Tucson to get a hotel. Here are my final thoughts about the whole thing. I believe all 3 things were connected. I saw the lights over the ridge, then I was woken up by the weirdest noises and lights outside the van, then dreamt my mom showed up to sit around the campfire and talk. I personally feel like it wasn't a dream and that I was visited by something, and I feel like whatever it was showed itself to me in a way that would be familiar by using my mom's image. The main reason I think it actually happened and wasn't a dream is finding the ashes and logs in the fire pit. I didn't even touch that thing, and then it magically had the remnants of a fire in it after everything else that happened. All those things together are just too weird. I don't know what happened to me, but it fits perfectly with some kind of X-Files alien abduction scenario. A chunk of my life straight up went missing, and I've never figured out how or why it happened. I jokingly say I was taken by aliens when I tell the story, but as crazy as it sounds, this really did happen to me. When I was 18, I was still living at home with my parents, and I had a midnight curfew. If I wasn't pulling into the garage by 12 o'clock, my dad would call to find out where I was, and I'd be in trouble because he didn't want to be woken up by me coming home. Our house was about 15 minutes away from literally everything, so no matter where in town I was hanging out, I could always leave by 11:45 and get home on time. One night while driving home, I was only about a mile from my house, and I'm positive it was 11:50 because I was keeping a close eye on the time. I also know I was a mile away because I had just passed the street my grandma lives on, and she's close enough to us that we can walk there. All of a sudden, my radio, which I'd had at a pretty loud volume, started cutting out. I almost don't want to call it cutting out though, because it sounded more like it was scanning through the stations on its own. I know I heard a country song in there somewhere while it was doing it, and I would never listen to a country station. Immediately after the radio, my headlights started doing equally crazy things. My brights had been on and they would get really bright, then quickly go dim, and then punch back up to bright again. Then seconds into that, all the warning lights and dash lights and interior lights were doing the same thing. They were pulsing back and forth between bright and dim and doing it in sync with the headlights. I wasn't scared, I just thought something was seriously wrong with my car and I didn't want to screw something up beyond repair, so I pulled over. It all happened really quickly, but the minute I got onto the shoulder of the road, my car shut off completely before I had even come to a complete stop. When I did stop the car and tried to turn the key, it did absolutely nothing. The whole thing was as dead as it could be. I didn't get concerned until I tried calling my dad to let him know what was going on, and my phone wouldn't turn on either. I was long pressing the power button and trying to get it to restart or do anything, but it was as dead as the car was. That was when I looked around, and I'm not kidding, I couldn't see any lights on anywhere in the neighborhood. It was like I had driven into some kind of giant power outage bubble. None of the houses nearby had any porch lights or inside lights on, and I was just sitting in a dead car with a phone that didn't work. It sounds a little dramatic, but the very first thought that came into my head was that World War III had started without me knowing, and some Russian or North Korean bomb had made it to the US and knocked out power and phones and all of that. I sat in my car for about 3 minutes messing with my phone and trying to decide if I should walk back home or walk to my grandma's house and wake her up so I could call my dad. Then, before I had even figured out what to do, all of my car lights came back on. I didn't touch or do anything, but I guess since the key had still been turned to the ignition position, it all kicked back on by itself at the same time. My brights were on, the radio was loud and on again, and it scared the absolute hell out of me. I will admit that in my mild state of shock, I didn't even notice if the lights around the neighborhood were back on again or not, so I really don't know. The first thing I did was turn on my phone, and I actually had to manually turn it back on as if it had been shut down. As soon as the screen lit up, the clock on my home screen was at 12:20, and I had a missed call from my dad. Not only did I briefly think I was going insane, but it also meant I had somehow lost around 30 minutes of time. I knew for a fact that I had only been sitting in my car for somewhere in the range of 3 minutes, so the confusion I felt was intense. I mean, the entire event had only been about 5 minutes long, from first noticing my radio to turning my phone back on. Seeing that much time had gone by was completely absurd. I didn't do anything else but start my car and drive the last couple of minutes back to my house. When I finally did get home, of course, I did get in trouble. I told my dad honestly and exactly what had happened, but he didn't buy any of it, and he thought I was just trying to cover up being out too late. I really can't blame him though, because my car is only a few years old and it's a Toyota. My dad is a lifelong car guy, so it would be easier for him to believe I was actually abducted by aliens than it would for him to believe a perfectly maintained Toyota broke down. I can't begin to tell you what happened though. I've never experienced anything like it. I did ask my grandma afterward, and I know she didn't lose power at her house that night, or at least none of her clocks were reset or anything, so who knows. I've heard of lost time before, but I never thought anything weird like that would happen to me. All I got out of the whole experience was long-lasting confusion, a feeling of being creeped out whenever I think about it too much, a dad who lost a little more trust in me, and a weekend of having my car taken away. So there were really no winners that night, except maybe the aliens.